Dear guests, please take your seats, panelists, the floor, because we're going to have rather insightful discussion.
Like any place you want.
So let us start. So our timelines shift a little bit in terms of our discussions. So we have so much to say. We have so much to discuss. So our next discussion, our next session is about the girl power, about the women against violence and oppression worldwide. So I'm going to moderate this discussion in 2 languages. Also, I'll switch between Ukrainian and English. So in the first place, I'd like to thank everyone who has made it here to Ukraine, to Kiev, and such times. So this is quite a responsible decision. And so here, as part of this panel are courageous women who will share their experiences, how you can withstand authoritarian pressure, the pressure of displacement, and so on. In Crimean Tatar language, there is a language kuch, if I pronounce it right, which means the resilience, and that's what we're going to discuss today. And another important thing I'd like to bring up today, this session is going to be dedicated to the females that are not with us anymore. Viktoria Amelina, it's important to mention her, human rights advocate who documented war crimes and was killed by a Russian missile in Kramatorsk. She was just in a restaurant, so we lack her voice these days. But every time we are having such sessions, we have such events, it's important to mention her, to mark her everything that she has done and her inputs. So we're going to discuss the experiences of different countries. So first I'll introduce all the participants, the panelists, and then I'll ask them questions. So we have Lenya Omarova, Leila Seidbeck, Annie Maudi, and Ana Vasquez Calmenares. And we are going to have Anna Suharova online. So I think that we could start with a short video. It's a public ad that was prepared by Nomoses project, and we're going to hear the voices of women who have lived through the captivity or the occupation, sexual violence, and it will remind us that women are powerful individuals that can speak about dignity, respect, and their power. So the video contains graphic content. So this is the story of Yulia. So the house was my safety and my box of memories, my treasure. I was taken from this home together with my husband, and my children were left alone. How do I take them from the torture, from their memories of torture? Will they ever feel safe? Will I see them again? Just, I can consent to anyone. Just bring my children back. Don't give them to the orphanage. This is Natalie's story. Mom, you haven't taught me what to do. What do I do when I'm claimed and I'm not guilty? When they shut me down in a place of no existence, when there is nothing, there is no fresh air, there is no sun, there is no well. I can just see a small bit of sky and I'm taking it like a crumbs of bread. And there are the memories of the world that is so warm, where I am together with my family, where I do what I love, where I teach children physics and mathematics, and I'm now in darkness that is pressuring me. I'm doing the math sums to myself so that I can keep sane. How do I keep these memories of sanity? Lenia's story. So I was detained illegally. I was deported to Russia as a very dangerous criminal. But what are their claims? I just learned 6 months later, I was kept in solitary confinement. It was just me and myself. What is it hiding? The years of imprisonment, the friends I will never see. I'm talking to the objects in my cell so that I remember what my voice sounds like, so that it scares the darkness that is around me. This is Ludmila's story. I was imprisoned for 3 years and 13 days. From the first day, I believed that I'll be set free, but it is so hard to survive when you don't know for sure if you will see a ray of sun. For 3 years and 13 days, I was kept in this cell. I never saw fresh air. I never saw the sun, but I knew that I was waited for. I know that I would return. Remember me, please remember me, I beg you. So as of the beginning of 2025, about 20,000 civilian women and men are held in captivity, and the exact data we do not have of how many people are held in captivity, and almost 80% of people that are kept in captivity, they undergo sexual violence. So this humiliating silence following the video speaks a lot about our feeling, about how much pain these stories contain, and at the same time so much power. I'd like us to hear a voice of one of the women that was part of this video. This is Lenia's story, and this is a vivid example of how Russian occupation and Russian regime on the occupied territories, temporarily occupied Crimea in particular, is a target. The women are the target. They're persecuted. They experience violence. They experience so many horrid things that we have heard today. Lenia, I just wanted to ask you, just share your story. The arrest, the captivity, the prison, and the source of power to withstand it all. Hello. Thank you for this question, Irina. Greetings to all, to those who are with us. In the first place, I wanted to be clear on the definitions. What are political prisoners in Ukraine? If globally, these are people who withstand the regime in their own country. In Ukraine, the situation is much more complex. It's completely different, I would say. These are ordinary people that are leading their ordinary, normal lives. They build homes, they bring up their children, they love their country. But once just a third party country just invades and says it's our territory now. So, respectively, everyone who thinks the situation is different and expresses their views as opposing the third country's stance, then, as for example, you can just do anything. You can join the rallies. You can even do a manicure in blue and yellow colors, and then you are a prisoner. You are imprisoned by the third country. They experience violence, violent treatment, and so on. My story started in 2014, probably. Before that, I was living in Viktoria, in a sunny city. If you've been to Crimea, you probably know it, or you've heard of it. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea and said that it was their territory, their home, from then on. And I decided that it would be safer for me to move to the mainland Ukraine. I moved to Kiev. I continued my studies. And then I worked. But my closest relatives, they were still in Crimea, as most of Crimean Tatars. And tragically, or we're obliged, especially the elder people, just stay home and never leave Crimea. I'll explain later why. So it happened so in my family that my father got sick, and I wanted to go back and visit him. I'm sure you would do the same. But as soon as I tried to cross over to Crimea, I was arrested. In the first place, I was abducted. Then I went through an 8-hour interrogation, and then I was arrested. At first, they told me that I was crossing the border at the wrong place, or maybe I was violating some procedures, and I tried to appeal, and somehow I managed to find a lawyer who filed this appeal, and in 90% of cases, people are just imprisoned, and that's all for good. And they never give them any opportunity to talk to a lawyer or to their family, so that they can put them under psychological and physical pressure, so that they can break their spirit, so to say, their will, so that they can confess to the crimes they have never committed. So I managed to find a lawyer. I managed to file an appeal 3 months after I was imprisoned or detained. And when I tried to leave the prison, just actually leave physically the building of the prison, there was this white car. They put a sack on my head, and they abducted me. Following a very difficult, a very harsh night, I was taken to court again, and I was imprisoned again. And then there was a carousel of, claims, for a fortnight of this. They were just really putting me under pressure. They were shifting me between the buildings so that they could hide me from my lawyer. This lasted for 6 months. In 5 months' time, exactly, an FSB officer came to me and said that I was a spy. That's what their claim was, and that I had to confess to a video camera, but I refused. And then they threatened that they would take me to Moscow. That's what they did. And for 1.5 years, I spent in one of the harshest penitentiaries of Russia. So until I was exchanged in 2024, thanks to the coordinated efforts of activists and civil society or politicians and the coordination headquarters. Unfortunately, my story is not unique. There are thousands of stories like that. And the scary thing is that most of them we cannot trace. And because Russia considers them, those people, to be their own, its own citizens, because it issues passports to them by force, even though this this pressure is illegal action. This is part of their repressive policies. Well, for now, we don't know. About 80% of people that Russia is hiding. And what is scary also is what is happening to women. They're being abducted. I'll give you a name. Helena Довгопола, who is 70. She's 70. She's from Crimea, and she's a pensioner. And she was abducted. She was tortured, and they were trying to break her fingers. And they sentenced her to 12 years in prison. They called her. They claimed that the state treason, and they claimed she was a terrorist. Oksana Synerjuk, Irina Danilovich, Khatija Boyukjan, Yara Ekskambetova. So you can Google them. And I cannot tell all their stories or each story, but they are available online. Most of these people are under psychological and physical pressure. They experience sexual violence in many cases. We have to bring it up. We have to denounce this on every level in the civil society. I think that the second part of a question would be on the everyday struggle. The Crimean Tatar women and the women of other origin that are living in the temporarily occupied Crimea, they become a target for the occupation authorities. What is their struggle like on the daily basis? Maybe you have some examples or tendencies that you'd like to share. I'd like to share about the movements of Zlamavka and Żółta Stryczka. These are prominent. These are our pride, our source of inspiration. In the government-controlled areas of Ukraine. In fact, physically being in Ukraine and newly occupied territories, well, it is scary because you're under pressure from Russia. They arrest people every day so that it's made public, so that everyone can see it, so that others are intimidated, to send a message that you can be next. And they're doing a lot to foster that. So just imagine, it's okay, I think, to worry about, to be concerned about yourself, about your own family, and to be careful when possible. But we have Zlamovka and Żółta Striczka movements that are trying to pronounce their stance to show that the occupied territories, they don't give up, they will not surrender, and that they believe that these territories will be brought back under Ukrainian control. We have, we celebrate Independence Day, and what they do, the representatives of these movements, they just wear small yellow and blue ribbons, and they put it up on online, on social media, their faces not showing or blurred. Of course, in Crimea you can learn you can learn several languages, Ukrainian, Russian, and Crimean Tatar, but in fact, the learning of Crimean Tatar language and Ukrainian language are subdued, and there are volunteers who are trying to teach the younger generation of those who have been under occupation for 12 years. These youngsters, they cannot learn a language, but these volunteers, they give them free of charge classes. And I think that this is also a great sign of resistance. And this everyday passing of knowledge to young generation, telling about Crimea under occupation is that they do different appeals, and this is taking an action, and even when they step into courtrooms during the trials against political prisoners, it's also about taking an action. There is a book by Osman Aritmemetov. I highly recommend that you read it. You can also join the initiative of writing a letter to our political prisoners, either in Russian or in English. Those should be, otherwise they won't pass the censorship. Like Osman that I've just mentioned, he visited the court, the litigations, the court sessions, and the Russians didn't like that, and they imprisoned him. So thank you. We will continue. So Lenier brought up the story of Irina Danilovich, a nurse from Crimea who unveiled corruption schemes during COVID pandemic, and the misuse of funds that never reached hospitals, I think that it is a very important bridge to our next speaker, and I'll switch to English.
Я хотів задати наступне питання Лейлі Середбековій. Є різні історії, є різний досвід серед українських жінок. Women who are fighting against corruption, not only human rights defenders, etc., shows us in a very bold way that authoritarian violence is acting through different fields. It is targeting women in gender aspects as well as women in the anti-corruption fight, etc. And maybe we can speak about some same source, post-imperial system, post-Soviet system, targeting everything, dealing with civil society and human rights and freedom, etc. So maybe I would like to ask you, Leila, about your perspective as a human rights defender in exile. How does this Russian post-imperial pressure influence Kyrgyzstan now, and how does it shape the environment for women activists in terms of safety, for example, in terms of freedoms and your possibilities to speak out?
Thank you so much. I was trying to find a switch. Apparently, it's already on. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with all of you today. It's a huge honor to be invited to be a part of Ukraine's fight for freedom and rule of law and democracy. So in talking about the situation in my country, I want to start with a little bit of background on what Kyrgyzstan is. So Kyrgyzstan is a country in Central Asia that has an unfortunate. Actually, it was quite unlucky to be located in a pretty complicated neighborhood. It's surrounded by autocracies. The worst of the worst type. It has a border with China. It has Russia to the north. It has Iran in the neighborhood and Afghanistan. So it's not really a neighborhood that has a lot of good examples for democracy and human rights development, unfortunately. We have followed as a society. We have actually followed the same scenario, very similar scenario to Ukraine. We have had revolutions that were caused by corruption and human rights abuses in 2005, in 2010, and in 2020. I must, however, also acknowledge that we actually were quite good at chasing our corrupt authoritarian leaders out. However, we are still not that good at choosing a leader who will be able to stand against and take the pressure that is still coming from Russia, unfortunately, and every incoming president has fallen a victim to Russian pressure. And we're in a situation where they felt somehow that they were being given a proposal that they could not refuse, so to say. And the political pressure on Kyrgyzstan from Russia is actually immense. And considering that country is quite small, it has very limited resources in terms of population as well. We are not that numerous. We're only about 6 million people. Half of which are probably women. Some part of that are children and older people. So we do not have the force to fight with them in terms of, like, you know, under, if there is a threat of actual military action from Russia, there is just no way for the population to fight back, obviously. But also, in terms of political pressure, there is a thing that is called a kleptocratic club. And I know that many people, unfortunately, are not aware of the existence or do not really, they did not imagine of how important understanding that the existence of that kleptocratic network is. So Kyrgyzstan is a member of an autocracy club. An autocracy club that actually extends globally and doesn't only have countries of our region, which are Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and also includes Venezuela, it also includes Cuba, it includes Iran, and the leader of that club is, of course, Russia. For many reasons, also because Russia is actually the inventor of this very unique format of a mafia state that is called kleptocracy, which we also research in our organization, and it has changed. So the authoritarianism of our modern times is very different from what we used to have in the past, where these governments only were based either on a religion or on some ideology. They are now rather based on the idea of the possibility of governments or political elites who are leading these countries to continue being able to steal, to continue stealing the resources of their nations and to enrich themselves and therefore remain in power indefinitely. And this is something that also Russia provides to our countries, in particular to Kyrgyzstan, is the promise of indefinite rule, impunity for theft, and political support on the international arena. And in exchange, of course, our country provides a lot of resources back to Russia as well. And as, for example, the previous panel has outlined, it not only provides the human resource for the war, and Central Asia really has a lot of potential in that in this regard of young men of fighting age or around 30 or 40 to supply to Russia, and they do supply as migrant workers. They also provide a possibility of laundering their wealth through Kyrgyzstan and other countries of the region. They provide the possibility of launder money through cryptocurrency platforms that they host. Unfortunately, Kyrgyzstan happens to be one of the most active areas for Russia to use in this regard. Also, it provides sort of a way for Russia to relocate its businesses into Kyrgyzstan because they're not sanctioned, and it's quite easy to relocate their assets there. So the role of Kyrgyzstan in this situation is actually quite large, despite the fact that it might seem to be insignificant. What also is quite important is that Russia puts a lot of pressure on Kyrgyzstan to eliminate its civil society, and the authorities of Kyrgyzstan have complied fully. In the last couple of years, the NGOs were forced to shut down. The activists and journalists have been forced to either leave the country or they are imprisoned. Some of my colleagues are imprisoned or under house arrest, facing quite heavy charges, such as attempt to overthrow constitutional order, organization of riots, and so on. So all of these charges of terrorist and extremist nature. Some were forced into exile, but also the transnational repression trends that are also being supported by Russia complicate their asylum procedures, the smear campaigns, which our authorities also carry out through Russian-controlled media in our region is also an additional pressure that the civil society has to carry. The actual lack of information resources in Kyrgyzstan, as well as in neighboring states, have actually been felt especially hard after the destruction of Radio Liberty, and Voice of America is now gone. So we do not have that resource anymore in terms of information. It became a little bit more difficult for us to put out, an agenda that is not Russocentric or is not really repeating Kremlin propaganda for the people to be able to read and find out the actual facts about various situations, including about the war in Ukraine, its reasons, and when it started, why it started, and so on. And Russia has been quite effective in holding the so-called round tables, and they actually look very much like ours when we meet in a coalition to discuss, democratic things and rule of law and so on. They do meet, and they actually even stopped being very modest about the topics of their meeting. They do actually have round tables, also on ministerial level, where they discuss the threat of civil society to the stability of our government. So, and they would actually put out the topic publicly in the media to advertise, and that's where their ministers of interior and officials from the KGB structures from our countries gathered to discuss what they can do to eliminate the threat of us. And I must also mention, of course, that the reason why women human rights defenders are being hit especially hard in Kyrgyzstan and other Central Asian countries is, first of all, because their activity questions the patriarchal norms which are being used by the authoritarian regimes of our countries, that they're being punished for trying to change the situation with also violence against women and girls, where this violence is actually being used exactly to suppress the women's voices in the country and to ensure that they are being oppressed, that they are being locked down within the confines of their homes, that they are silenced, and that they are not able to demand anything, not from their families, not from their husbands, brothers, not from their sons, and obviously not from their authorities. And we have to understand that women in our societies is like 50% of the population. It's a huge force. So for the authoritarians to be able to keep the 50% of population suppressed like that and silenced really makes their job much easier, when they, can then afterwards only worry about ensuring that they somehow, manage the rest of the population, which are male, to burden them with issues such as poverty. We have also discussed that it's very easy to fabricate, to put people in a situation where they live in poverty and only are concerned with, everyday issues and not very concerned with the political side of things. Russia does provide security assistance in repressing the civil society and women activists in Kyrgyzstan. And it must be also mentioned, and that is something that the experts and various people in the West still find it hard to imagine. We do have Russian FSB sitting in Kyrgyzstan in the same building as GKMB officers. They've been sitting there for a long time, and I'm pretty sure the Ukrainian colleagues do understand what I'm talking about, because they have had a pretty similar experience with these people. So what else can I mention? We have to understand that talking about women activism and imagining the type of work they have to do and what they're facing, we have to understand that these women are not only fighting with their own oppressive government. Like, women in Kyrgyzstan are not only fighting with their authoritarian president, they're also fighting with everybody else in the world, because it's one network that is very closely connected. They're fighting with a very strong group of very bad guys with lots of resources. And so my concluding word would probably be that I really want us to work harder in terms of collaborating, in terms of building stronger and bigger coalitions, and to ensure that we talk more and talk more often with each other to see, how we can put our minds together and resources together and see how we can tackle these guys together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are seeing from your stories that oppression and discrimination is never singular. It's always plural. It can instrumentalize anything: culture, gender, violence, poverty, etc., etc. And speaking about women resistance, meaningful ways of women's resistance in your country, in your region, how do women stay connected and empowered in such conditions? How do women help each other, for example?
Well, we stay connected. That's first and foremost, and we treat very with utmost importance. We treat the possibility of just being able to talk to each other. It doesn't have to be about work. It doesn't have to be about anything in particular, but just to be able to call each other and talk over things that concern you, the questions that you might have, and just hear the colleague's perspective on that. it's also quite important to be able to continue trusting each other, because these regimes are really good at planting paranoia in our networks. And I have seen this happen across many different civil societies, also with which I have worked. I didn't only work on the issues of human rights in my own country, in Kyrgyzstan. I also work on Tajikistan and Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, actually. Quite dangerous places, which probably can only be compared to North Korea situation. And so I've seen civil societies collapse because of this distrust that has been planted by authoritarians, where they are afraid that the colleagues would, that some colleagues are working for authorities, and even if they are not. But there are doubts already in terms of whether or not I can trust. So I think just maintaining these very strong relationships with each other and being straightforward is what is still keeping us afloat in Kyrgyzstan. And in this regard, I can also say that Kyrgyzstan civil society is probably the last one standing in Central Asia for now. We are now, of course, facing a very difficult situation where our organization has so far collected about 200 plus cases of political prisoners. And that is a situation we've never had before. It was totally unimaginable to actually put HRDs in jail. None of the previous administrations has ever dared to do that. And this one, unfortunately, was really bold, and they probably were absolutely sure, probably also with support from Russian authorities, that there will be no consequences for their actions at all. So we do have now human rights defenders who are in jail and who are facing quite serious charges, something that is quite new for us. Something that already has happened in neighboring Tajikistan, it's something that has already happened in Uzbekistan and in Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan's civil society is suffering as well, but that has already been happening for some years, so they're not new to that fight at all. We are. What else is important? We have now also discovered the importance of exile networks, and that is something that we're also seriously working on, is to ensure that these exile networks are not only retreat resource, but also a strategic post that can be used for relaying the narratives, of providing the information from on the ground, in working on the advocacy efforts, because the regional, local human rights defenders are no longer able to do that. So that is also something that we are working on.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I think that Leila's story has shown us how authoritarian pressure and Russian post-imperial, post-Soviet influence can shape the everyday risks faced by women activists, even without any open conflict or occupation, etc. In many parts of the world, women live through the direct physical aggression and direct consequences of war and displacement and systematic violence. And I would like to speak on this reality, and I would like to pass my next question to Annie. This is the experience of Democratic Republic of the Congo, who lived through decades of conflict, and their violence against women has been used as a weapon. And I would like to ask my first question on what the recovery looks like for women who survived conflict and displacement and occupation.
Thank you very much. I think, like my biography says, I am also a co-lead of a women, peace and security pillar for African women, so this means the continent. And on the continent, we have different context, but whether you go from Sudan, Mozambique, Mali, or the DRC, women face a lot of conflict-related violence. And in almost all of this conflict, sexual violence is being used as a weapon of war. So from Lviv to Kiev, I was very much concerned to hear if that aspect is also of reality here, specifically in Crimea. Women and girls bear the cost of conflicts, but they remain very resilient, and their resilience even grows stronger in a difficult context. I will come down to the DRC because DRC is sharing similar situation as Ukraine, because the North and South Kivu of the Democratic Republic of Congo, this is the eastern part of DRC, which is rich in minerals. You can find lithium, cassiterite, you name it, all critical minerals that are needed for the new technology or electrical cars. It's just I'm naming this so that we can later on understand that interest in some conflict in some part of the world is beyond the geographical limit of that country, and sometimes the manipulation comes from far away, and the women and girls bears the price of that. The eastern part of the DRC is under foreign-backed armed group, and like I said, 2 provinces are controlled. Situation in the occupied zone is not different from what my sister just described earlier. Probably the only difference will be that for the DRC case, some Congolese claim to be the rebel against the Kinshasa, but in reality, we know that we have armed groups who are occupying the zone. How recovery looks like: women are first responders in the crisis. In the absence of international humanitarian actors, women have been there. I will take the example of escalation of conflict this January 27th in Goma. MONUSCO is the peacekeeping, the biggest peacekeeping mission of UN in the world. They withdraw. Some of the contingents were all hostage at the airport. The country, the town was taken under control of a neighboring country's special force, just exactly like Russia in Crimea. And 168 women were burnt down in prison, Muzenzi prison in Goma, after some of them were raped. So just that how unhuman first the situation is, before I can come to recovery, I just want you to understand the kind of terror that women have to recover from, and the resilience they've developed in this country, and how they have to navigate the extreme, complex, occupied zone with ongoing natural resources exploitation. So smuggling it out makes the women also, and girls and other children, boys as well, go into forced labor and all the transitional road or trade road of this mineral. Women work under cover of humanitarian response to build on resistance of monitoring human rights abuse, documenting and passing on information to some of us who live outside of the occupied zone. I will insist on this. This is at the risk of their life. Should they get caught, their life is at stake. But on a daily basis, as I sit here, women are monitoring, but all this is done under a humanitarian response crisis. Recovering in the occupied zone, I don't know if I can use that word. In the occupied zone, recovering is extremely difficult. But when we get to extract some victims from the occupied zone, at least we offer them some spaces, shelter, psychological support, legal aid. And legal aid can only be efficient if we were able to secure evidence, if we were able to keep some proof of violation that they went through. Nevertheless, in the same context, some other women are still having some shelter in the occupied zone, offering some spaces for dialogue, for group therapy, but also for sharing strategies on how they can resist and contribute. And surprisingly, at local level, women have solutions that works for them on a daily basis that secure their livelihood in that complex situation. Women are managing to talk to different groups, especially Congolese groups who have been brainwashed to support the aggression and aggressors, to make them, reconvert them into the national fight so they can turn against the aggressors. This is an extremely difficult task that the women are carrying, but yes, they are doing that, again, I insist, while still responding to humanitarian need with very limited resources and not having access to the coordination. Just if I can compare, that's something, a lesson that I've learned here that I'll go back and try and share it with our authority, is include women's local solution into the national coordination, because that scaling up can serve more lives and it will not be just for local solution. And the other thing that women are doing, apart from that recovery and mediation and a response, I've said it, it's also advocacy. Even if they're in occupied zone, for me to be able to advocate for real cases that are happening in the occupied zone, my advocacy is backed with data that comes directly from them. It is in this situation that we are trying to work, but the most important subject that we are struggling with is protection of human rights defenders. This time is not just women. Men, especially journalists, I have a lot of journalists here who try to cover the stories of sexual violence or use of sexual violence as a weapon of war, are becoming more in danger than women themselves. Because women cannot tell their story at the scale that a journalist can do or a human rights defender can do. So this has also put a different group in danger while trying to protect women and girls who are subjected to sexual violence in the occupied zone. But I must mention one thing. Around the occupied zone, there is also a multiple armed group of anarchists who are very indisciplined. We don't know whose order they're following, who are also committing other type of violence on women. So women find themselves at the cross of violence from the aggressor, from just the undisciplined group of people, from the young men also who were victims of violence few decades ago. I need to mention that DRC has been under this attack and aggression for the past 30 years. Since 1994, the eastern part of DRC has been in an ongoing conflict with rotating control of armed groups backed by different neighboring countries for the past 30 years. So we have boys of yesterday who saw their mothers being raped in front of them, who were forced to rape their own sisters, who have now become like a living weapon, can commit violence against anyone without knowing if the reason why they are doing it, because they did not get proper support after they witnessed violence of their sisters or mothers. So recovery is still a process for us and still a dream for most of women who are living in the occupied zone now. But the hope, the network, the solidarity, and the contact that we keep with them, and the fact that they know wherever we go, we're amplifying their voices, is giving them more strength and still growing their resilience in the occupied zone.
Thank you for sharing. It reminds me a lot on the experience of women on the occupied territories of Ukraine, in Crimea, in the Donetsk and Lugansk regions. I remember stories about women who managed to escape the occupied territories, and different stories on their experience of resistance, even some not very spectacular, some quite symbolic acts of resistance, like keep and speak Ukrainian in their inner circle, for example. It was so important. And maybe, Anya, I would like to ask you one more question about some practical ways women support each other. I'm referring not only to DRC experience, but maybe also to your experience as African women. Maybe you can share something interesting to us.
Thank you. First thing, I'll go to 2017. As African women, we realized that we had different conflict almost all over, because in the 5 regions, we had conflict. Some terrorist attack in the north, armed conflict, and the coup going on, and just urban insecurity. And what African women leaders did was to create what we call African Women Leaders Network. Because we realized that we have a lot of solutions that works at local level. Women are able to navigate in an extremely unsafe occupied zones or armed conflict zones, and able to talk to different belligerents, using their capacity as mediators, as a humanitarian. But those solutions are not being recognized and not being used when it comes to formal peace processes. And we will say that we have all men negotiation processes going on. So we're missing human perspective of more than half of the human being on the earth. And this more than half of human being on the world, most of the time, are not the ones starting conflict. So we're having the group that were not able to talk to each other and find peaceful resolution before conflict, leaving them in the room alone to try and resolve a conflict that they started amongst them. So we created African Women Leaders Network, where we have all former women head of states from Africa. This network is chaired by Her Excellency Ellen Johnson. She was the first woman elected on the continent. What the network does is to amplify voices of local solutions and keep in touch. We are organizing a lot of solidarity mission, so that's to get reality of women who are not being heard by their own state authorities. When they see delegations coming from other African countries, it forces the men of their country to listen. As I sit here, I was supposed to be in Sudan because there were an attack on Al-Fashir, but the special envoy of Women, Peace and Security of AU, with whom we co-lead Women, Peace and Security pillar, is in Sudan. So this is one way we would go to and ask to meet with women, because we know that men in that country will not consider their voice. This is one way. The other way that we come up with solidarity is to organize joint advocacy. By the way, this will be a recommendation, and I will stand as a volunteer to contribute when time comes. We need to have joint advocacy. We can have advocacy at the tripartite biggest multilateral organizations. We know EU, UN, and for my region, I will talk about the AU. Latin America and Asia, I don't know much about that, the regional organization. But this works because you will have sometimes same country facilitating a peace process. In the case of Ukraine, I would say Washington, D.C. is facilitating peace process for Ukraine, but also for the Democratic Republic of Congo. So the women of Ukraine and us might have something to do if we think that the way the peace process is going, as women, we have a perspective that is not being taken into account. That's the other way that we come up with solidarity in joint initiative into advocacy or lobbying people who have influence on the process. The other way that we do it is humanitarian solidarity, is fundraising for on organizations that cannot access funding and support their work that they are doing. And we're also pushing a lot in dialogue at the community level and also community and authorities. So we don't have a one model to connect to each other, but we know that solidarity, dialogue, communication is key to keep us moving together and supporting each other.
Дякую.
Now we will see a video address from the next speaker. It will be a different region, Latin America. And we will see a video address from Tamara Sukhora, a criminal lawyer and human rights specialist. In her work as a human rights activist, she was engaged in advocating for justice in Venezuela, and recently Tamara became a mentor for Irina Hrobtsova, a Ukrainian human rights activist and lawyer. As part of the mentorship and advocacy initiative now, I suggest that we listen to Tamara.
Buenos días. Quiero darle las gracias ante todo a los organizadores del foro Crimea Global y al Ministerio de Asuntos Exteriores de Ucrania por esta oportunidad. Lamento no haber podido acompañarlos en persona, pero espero tener otra oportunidad y poder ir a ese país de esa gente valiente. Hoy quiero hablar de algo que trasciende fronteras ideológicas y geográficas. Cómo las mujeres, especialmente en contextos autoritarios, pueden sostenerse unas a otras para mantener viva la dignidad humana y apoyarse. Cuando pensamos en los regímenes autoritarios modernos, solemos ver cifras. Presos, políticos, periodistas, silenciados, exilio forzado, pero detrás de cada número hay un rostro. Y detrás de ese rostro casi siempre hay una mujer sosteniendo la vida, la madre que acompaña, la hermana que denuncia, la esposa que insiste, la hija que hereda la memoria. La represión intenta generar miedo, aislamiento y silencio. Pero la mujer que históricamente ha aprendido a resistir desde la intimidad de la casa y desde la comunidad, teje redes incluso en medio de la oscuridad. En los regímenes autoritarios modernos, las mujeres desarrollan formas de apoyo que trascienden la censura. Nos acompañamos compartiendo información, cuidando a las familias de perseguidos, difundiendo testimonio y sosteniendo emocionalmente a quienes enfrentan la represión. Estas redes nacen en los espacios más cotidianos: la cocina, la fila del mercado, los grupos digitales donde se hablan en clave. La mujer se convierte en puente, transmite conocimiento, protege la memoria y hace visible lo que el régimen quiere ocultar. Así, apoyándonos mutuamente, las mujeres no solo podemos sobrevivir al autoritarismo, sino que también lo desafiamos todos los días. Pero las mujeres también podemos y debemos aprender a sostenernos desde puntos distantes de países autoritarios. ¿Cómo hacerlo? Crear redes de comunicación y solidaridad utilizando los mecanismos modernos de comunicación que existen hoy día. Asistir y realizar eventos, conferencias sobre realidades de países autoritarios, ayudar a reproducir las noticias, darle visibilidad a la situación de esos países lejanos, construir comunidades de exilio y apoyarse mutuamente con esas comunidades, protegiendo y visibilizando la situación de la represión y la de los presos políticos del mundo. La mujer venezolana es un claro ejemplo de esto. Ha tenido que multiplicarse para alimentar a su familia, proteger a sus hijos y a veces tomar la dura decisión de separarse de ellos para garantizar su futuro. Cuando un ser querido es encarcelado por pensar distinto, la mujer se transforma en vocera, defensora, periodista improvisada, guardiana de la verdad, y ante la injusticia, la mujer venezolana no se rinde, organiza, denuncia, recuerda e insiste. Quiero darles un ejemplo tangible sobre esto. La campaña que dirijo desde el Instituto Casla apadrina un preso político del mundo. Esta iniciativa nace de un principio profundamente humano: un rostro, un caso, una situación país. Darle voz a través de una personalidad a un preso político del mundo. Si yo lo nombro, no lo desaparecen. Si lo acompaño, no lo rompen. Si cuento su historia, sigue vivo. Apadrinar significa asumir su nombre como propio, escribirle cartas, acompañar a su familia, denunciar su situación en redes, recordarle al poder que esa vida importa, que no está sola y que hay una comunidad que observa y sostiene. La solidaridad no siempre abre cárceles físicamente, pero debilita los muros psicológicos y del autoritarismo. Y una persona que sabe que no está sola, resiste más. En esta lucha por la libertad y la dignidad quiero extender mi abrazo al pueblo de Ucrania, un pueblo que hoy defiende no solo su territorio, sino su derecho a existir y decidir. A las mujeres ucranianas, madres, voluntarias, enfermeras, defensoras, mujeres que envían a sus hijos a lugares seguros mientras ellas se quedan para proteger su nación, les decimos, no están solas. Desde América Latina, desde Venezuela, desde cada país donde la libertad ha sido herida, reconocemos su valentía. Su resistencia nos inspira, su dolor nos convoca y su esperanza también es la nuestra. Porque cuando un pueblo defiende la libertad de todos. La libertad no siempre comienza con una gran revolución, a veces comienza con un gesto sencillo, decirle a alguien que no vamos a dejarlo solo. Y ese pequeño acto, repetido 1000 veces, puede cambiar el mundo. Muchas gracias.
Далі будемо продовжувати. Хочу передати.
Now, I would like to give the floor to the next speaker, Anna Vázquez-Colmenares.
At the gender-based violence as a structural and political message. And also you are working with the ways women respond in it collectively and doing it through different care practices and narrative resistance, etc. And maybe I would like to ask about your perspective on how do women in your country, in Latin America, as a region, read this message of violence against women? How do they resist it and reframe it? And maybe you can tell us more on the collective practices that emerge in the context of extreme violence, maybe networks of care we are discussing just before this panel, etc.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Irina. I'm very honored to be here in Ukraine, a country that today is teaching the world that it truly means what it truly means to resist colonial domination. Coming here, knowing this is a country at war, was not an easy decision. On my first night, when the air raid alert sounded, I actually ran to the shelter in my hotel. I didn't know what to take, how long it would be, what to expect. I felt fear. But it truly, if we really and truly want to build a decolonial and feminist future, sometimes we must show up even when we're afraid. Presence is part of resistance. So let me begin by locating myself honestly. I come from Oaxaca, that's in the southern part of Mexico. It's a region shaped by extraordinary indigenous civilizations. My family history reflects the complexity of Mexican identity. I come from Mixtec and Zapotec roots on one side, and on the other side, traces of Spanish colonial pasts, often through unequal or silent relations. I grew up hearing comments about my hair being too black or my eyes too slanted, subtle reminders of internalized racism, that the kind that colonialism leaves inside family. So I'm a mestiza, mixed heritage, with privilege that many indigenous compatriots have been denied. I do not speak Mixtec, the language of my maternal lineage, because my grandparents did not teach it to their children out of shame and fear of discrimination. Yet today I stand here wearing a huipil mixteco, a Mixtec traditional blouse woven by an indigenous woman on a telar de cintura, which is a backstrap loom, carrying my lineage with pride. I'm also a feminist and the author of a didactic feminist book for women who experience patriarchy without yet having the words to name it. And I speak to you from this intersection, with awareness of my privilege and with responsibility towards those whose voices have been silenced. So I want to talk about this, what we call femicide violence or feminicide violence. There is a difference. In Latin America, we have learned that femicide is not simply the killing of women because they are women. The English term femicide was defined by the South African feminist Diana Russell and described precisely that, the killing of women and girls because of their gender. But the Mexican feminist and anthropologist Marcela Lagarde took the concept further, translating it and expanding it as feminicidio, feminicide. She insisted on something crucial. Feminicidio is not only a gender crime, it is a state crime, a crime sustained by impunity, institutional negligence, and tolerance of violence. So, feminicidio, feminicide, is at the top of this structure of femicide violence. And this distinction matters deeply. When institutions fail to protect women, to investigate crimes, to deliver justice, as many times they do in our countries in Latin America, they send a message to women and to girls. Your life is not a priority. This message exists in peacetime and becomes even stronger in war, in occupation, and under authoritarian regimes. Violence takes different shapes across contexts, as we have seen in Mexico and Central America, disappearances, feminicidios. I have some data here in Mexico. As March of 2025, there is a record of 28,729 women reported missing or unlocated in our country. And this is related to drug trafficking, mostly, but not only. Also to the war between cartels, drug cartels. In Mexico, although officially records say that there are 968 femicide cases last year, NGOs have recorded much more, up to 10 feminicides every day. So disappearances, feminicides, human trafficking. In Kyrgyzstan, as Leila told us, repression, surveillance, intimidation of women activists. In occupied Crimea, cultural erasure, deportation, intimidation of Crimean Tatar women, abduction. Here in Ukraine, shelling, missile attacks, displacement, trauma, and the psychological costs of defending your nation. And yet, despite this difference, the underlying logic is the same. Gender-based violence is never private or isolated. It is structural, patriarchal, and often colonial. It is used to discipline women, to generate fear, and to control communities. But in every place I have visited from Oaxaca to Kyiv to Lviv to Kharkiv, women do something extraordinary. We organized, we protect each other, we resist through care, as Annie was telling us. Just a few days ago in Lviv, we all visited the unbroken ecosystem, a model of care, dignity, and rehabilitation unlike anything I have seen. Because there I saw not only physical and psychological rehabilitation for civilians and soldiers, or prosthetic workshops, or centers for veterans, social housing, also the Unbroken Mothers program supporting pregnant women and mothers who fled the war. So what I think is that Unbroken is not just the medical ecosystem, it is a care ecosystem. And in those cities, I have learned of another kind of resilience. Women leading NGOs, documenting war crimes, rebuilding cultural institutions, supporting displaced families, and creating safe spaces for children under the threat of daily shelling. The courage of Ukrainian women is not abstract. It is organized, practical, collective. And you know what? The world needs to know this. I didn't know about this before I came here. Not only the tragedy, we already know the tragedy, but the extraordinary leadership of Ukrainian women. Women who have volunteered for the front even without being obligated. Women who sustain their households after losing partners or homes. Women who rebuild schools, shelters, and communities. Women who carry the emotional labor of war on their shoulders. For many years, I have worked in political and crisis communication, and perhaps this is my communication background speaking, maybe the world needs a new narrative tool. Millions of people no longer follow the news, but they follow Netflix, TikTok, Instagram. So a film, a documentary, a short series about Ukrainian women, soldiers, caregivers, doctors, mothers, volunteers, abducted women, resilient women, survivors, could help the world understand what is happening here through the stories of women who hold society together. Narratives matter. Stories democratize empathy. As a political and crisis communication consultant, I have learned something essential. How we talk about violence determines whether women feel alone or accompanied, whether they feel shame or dignity, whether they see only fear or also possibility. A feminist approach to communication, I think, would include, first, naming violence clearly without euphemisms, using non-victimizing language, making women's agency visible, sharing information and networks so no woman feels isolated, and reframing women not only as victims of war, but as leaders of recovery. In feminist movements across Latin America, we often say, lo que no se nombra no existe. What is not named does not exist. We have adopted this phrase collectively because silence protects power. Naming creates visibility, public policy, and justice. Empathy is important, but empathy is not enough. Solidarity must become structure, strategy, infrastructure, must become architecture, not only sentiment. So I imagine solidarity in 4 dimensions. One, immediate, some of them have been told, so I'll go this quick. First, immediate support networks between women's organizations in Ukraine, Latin America, Central Asia, and beyond. Safe channels, legal aid, psychosocial support, shelters. 2, exchange of knowledge. Mexican and Latin American feminist groups have decades of experience accompanying survivors, working with trauma, building care collectives. Ukrainian women have deep expertise in resilience, emergency response, and community survival. Together, we can enrich each other. 3, economic and political cooperation. Women should cooperate economically through joint projects, businesses, innovation, and rebuilding efforts to reduce dependency on traditional centers of power. And 4, we must promote counter-hegemonic narratives that honor women's leadership in a war, in displacement, in care. Narrative is not decoration. Narrative builds memory, and memory builds justice. Being in Ukraine has changed me profoundly. I live not with fear, but with admiration, admiration for the clarity, dignity, and determination of you and all Ukrainian men and women. And I live with hope, because what you're building here is not only resistant against an invading force, it's a new model of courage, care, and democratic strength. Your stories matter, your leadership matters, and the world needs to hear them through journalism, through art, through film, through platforms for young people. Our contexts differ, but our struggles speak to one another. Across Latin America and across Ukraine, women know how to turn fear into clarity, pain into care, and uncertainty into collective strength. We are not only surviving, we are shaping the future through care, through solidarity, and through the unshakable conviction that our lives and our communities matter. Thank you.
I would like to ask you one more question about maybe some specific case from your country or from the region about women's resilience or some initiative helping women empowerment.
Thank you. Well, there is a lot of internal displacement in Mexico caused by the cartel drug fights. So many communities have been displaced, and there are several groups of collective of women that have organized themselves to keep their roots, because sometimes it takes decades for them to return to their homeland. That happens also here. And they, many women are very preoccupied because they don't want to lose their identity. They don't want their children to lose the connection to their land. When they are forced to go elsewhere, another language is spoken. For instance, in Mexico, Spanish is like the official language, but there are 68 languages that are spoken, and many of them are prone to extinction. So there is this this particular effort of building nests of language, they're called, and so elderly people, not only elderly women, also men, get reunited with very small children from 3 to 6 years, and they just have time together, so the children learn the language. And it seems something that could be not important, but it really is important because it has to do with identity. So that's something that comes to mind.
Thank you. I think here in Ukraine we can perfectly relate with this importance of language, having our past of Soviet Russian language dominance, and the necessity of creating our own nests of Ukrainian languages, Ukrainian language in our families and our communities. I see that we are having 6 minutes more maybe to hear your questions from the audience. If you have something to ask, please. Yes, please. I think хтось може, можливо, хтось мікрофон.
Maybe someone could pass the mic.
Дякую.
Thank you. Sorry. Linia Ibragimova, Crimean Tatar artist and activist. My question is to Anna, to all women. What do you think? Will it be useful and helpful if Ukrainian activists and women activists will create such events where they can online invite something like cultural and business, organized cultural business branches for discussion, and not just discussion, but also to make cultural and business connections? Will that be helpful in your opinion? In terms of abusive relations, women can flee if they have financial support. They can flee such abusive relations. If they have legal support, if they have psychological, physical support. What do you think such initiatives, if we will support each other in this way? Thank you. Maybe one more question, and then we will give answers to both of them. Well, we are waiting.
An answer. Yes. It was the idea of our colleague to create some kind of online event gathering women from different countries and speaking, for example, on some business tools and business ideas to help women in danger, for example, to have interesting financial or business instruments to be empowered, for example.
Oh, thank you. Well, if I can... Wonderful idea. I think with EI devices, we can have real conversations in real time in different languages. And it would I think that women would benefit from knowing that they're not alone. And across the world, there are women who are living the same experiences, to feel empowered, to know that really when Annie said, and when you said also that it's important that women don't feel alone, no? To share these experiences in such a platform would be fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Leila.
I will repeat what I have already mentioned during my presentation, that I find it of utmost importance to use every opportunity to talk, be it through Zoom or through physical interaction, on the margins of some sort of conferences, and use every opportunity to get together and just exchange thoughts, ideas, and brainstorm. And I know there is a number of coalitions that have existed already that are totally outside of the traditional funding resources. And there are new coalitions that are now being built on, sorry to say, on the ruins of collapsed organizations that have lost their funding and so on. But they are building something really, truly remarkable right now. I think there is a coalition that is called Defenders Coalition or something. So, but please reach out. I will gladly share links and contact information to these coalitions. There is a coalition called Every Woman Treaty. They actually do hold Zoom meetings and talk over with the coalition members. It's like 2,500 organizations that are focusing on women's rights across the world from everywhere. So there is like a coffee hour that they hold regularly. They also now decided to provide additional resources to their members and whoever is interested on, various issues, the psychosocial support. There is some aspect of material support. There is the aspect of fundraising support as well. Some consultations. So they are working on these issues to ensure that they somehow provide some sort of support and empowerment to women activists across the world. So please do let me know if you want that information. I'll see what I can, maybe I can hook you up with them and you'll have something to build off of. Thank you.
Thank you. Anya?
Thank you. Your question pushed me to read things that I wrote down, but because I wasn't reading. One of my recommendations here, I will read it out, was to build Defender Safety Net, which I saw it as a rapid cross-border referral for women under threat, legal aid, but also economic opportunity sharing, not funding, because we all sometimes at some point as women need funding, but we can get into economic opportunity sharing. And I also identified a gap, which is use of technology. We might want to do things through technology, but in some of our region, we will need capacity building in order to have women to use this solution, taking into account local context, but with a global support. So the idea you bring up is a really good idea. I would support it. It's actually great, but this needs, like I said, to take into account context, but have that partnership and support. I also suggested that we work around a kind of playbook that can be co-developed between the Ukrainian women, Crimean Tatar women, indigenous women from our different conflict-affected and occupied zone to come up with some solutions that can be cost-effective, because we would use more online solutions, but then we will also need to bridge the language barrier and find solutions on how we can get solutions that are in Ukrainian. I don't know if Tatar has a specific language, but in Africa, in my country, we have more than 450 languages, even though we have 4 main languages. Indigenous communities that are affected might not even speak Swahili, which is a local language. So even me, I will still need to bridge the language barrier to get to some women. But the idea of starting is a very good idea, but we just have to think that we need some capacity exchange, whether it's in technology, in understanding our sisters' context, so that our joint initiative can be locally grounded and globally supported. Thank you.
Є ще для одного.
There is room for one question, probably, in the first row. And then Maria. Okay, two questions. We need to sum up, wrap up, but if you allow us, we will continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the absolutely excellent panel today. My name is Sabine Freiser. I'm the representative of UN Women here in Ukraine. And I want to say that this panel was incredibly powerful. I go to a lot of panels, and this one was one of the strongest ones that I've heard in a very long time. And I really want to thank the Crimea Global team for setting up this panel, because it's not always that you have a panel on women's resistance in an event like this. Of course, this year we're celebrating the 25th anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325, and spending a lot of time talking about the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And the Women, Peace and Security agenda is supposed to help build solidarity and help networking across borders. Yet, none of you on this panel mentioned WPS, Women, Peace and Security, once in your presentations. So I was wondering if that was by chance, if there's some kind of breakdown now between the activists like you who are working every day in your own countries, if there's some kind of break in the Women, Peace and Security agenda where you no longer feel perhaps 100% part of it, or if it was just by accident that it just didn't come up. So I was wondering, if this is symbolic of something. Has the WPS agenda started going in a different direction, or not? But I want to say that everything that you said about solidarity and building up networks is incredibly important. Ukraine is incredibly remarkable by the coalitions that exist at the local level. You've been traveling around the country, so you've been seeing that. In cities like Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Sumy, you see women coming together, working together in coalition. In the country, you see also very strong coalitions, and your invitation to have stronger global coalitions, I think, is extremely important and valuable.
Thank you very much for that question. I was actually asking Lisa in New York to get us some UN women representative. Thank you that you are here. Personally, I would say it's just by, I would say, accident that I did not specifically say UN Resolution 1325. But secondly, for me, I think it is also important as a feminist that we move away from repeating this speech, because sometimes it doesn't resonate with reality. Sometimes the same jargon, we see it with people who give speeches, give promises that they do not implement in reality. So it's some kind of feminist stand of saying, I will be doing things without necessarily having to name them. African Women Leaders Network is supported by UN Women, and I think the biggest friend is Germany. But I love the idea of being pragmatic, of having impact on real life than just having the same conferences, speeches. But I would have loved to say that because it's 25th anniversary, it is a remarkable. But by the way, I will also acknowledge the Ukrainian president. I've noticed that there's a lot of women who are occupying, or when I look at the program, who have high-level nomination. So in Africa, we call it positive masculinity. It is acknowledging women's skill and capacity to contribute, not just in the kitchen, but at the highest level. Women's peace and security agenda, if you know, it was more in practical rather than in the speech, because we had security talk with Munira and Sue on the panel, which we don't usually see. When we see women on the panel, we're talking about humanitarian response. When we see women on the panel, we're talking about sexual violence, and most of the time we go up to UN Security Council to testify on the use of sexual violence. So this is also a dimension that I found very, very, very loud without naming Resolution 1325, but actually implementing it in women's participation, women's contribution in hard security talk. But yes, I acknowledge 25 years of Resolution 1325, which it's progress, slow though, but also the challenges that we need to take up to translate that resolution into concrete program, into concrete solution, into concrete response. I think you will remember the speech of the UN General Secretary, and agree with me that we have a lot of challenges to overcome, but the resolution is great. Thank you.
Ще запитання, так.
It's not a question, but rather a comment. On behalf of the Crimea Global team, I would like to thank the previous speaker for noting our efforts and for the support, actually, of the conference. And I would also like just to highlight how impressed I was with the fact that, like, people who specifically deal with women's rights issues and with understanding this power dynamics or lack of power dynamics sometimes, how sensitive they are to these dynamics when it comes to colonialism. And like our guests, dear speakers that are at this stage, I was impressed that immediately after visiting Kharkiv, after talking to the representatives of the Crimean Tatar people, we don't have to persuade them anymore what kind of war we're fighting. So I just wanted to thank you for this, being so sensitive and understanding so well Ukrainian fight. And I'm very happy that you have lots of ideas of the further cooperation, and of course I hope that we can find proper partners on Ukrainian side and to make these ideas come to reality. Thank you.
I think this is where we can wrap it up and move on to networking and socializing. And I think everyone who is here, we were impressed how many similarities and parallels are there in our stories, whether we are talking about Ukraine, specifically the temporarily occupied Crimea, or is it Venezuela, Mexico, Kyrgyzstan, Congo. We learn about women who find strength to fight against oppressors, whether we are talking about the Freud line or the armed aggression, whether it's corruption or violence against women in any context. I think everyone, this is the emotion that I would like you to live with. And also, I would like you to live with the thought of the strength of women who are much stronger than they seem. Thank you for sharing your experience, and thank you to the audience.